Hello, well here we are in Manchester for the Conservative Party conference. Behind me is Britain's Protection Hotel, where Nicky Morgan, Member of Parliament for Loughborough, is going to be talking about the public ombudsman system and the need for reform. She'll also be launching her new booklet on the subject, published by Bretwalda Policy Paper Series. I believe, meeting's about to start. Let's go in, see what she's got to say.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today, and thank you very much for publishing my paper. I have been meaning to write this paper for a long time, so I'm very grateful to Rupert and Bretwalda Books for forcing me to sit down and finish it when I've been talking about it for a long time and trying to find the time. So when we talked in early summer, about conference publication, it was very useful to know I've actually got to do this over the summer holidays or summer recess. So it's nice to see it finally in print. Good. And I'm just going to talk very briefly about why I think the Ombudsman is an area for reform, and why I think it fits in with a Conservative agenda, the coalition government agenda actually, of empowering people. Very happy obviously to have questions, discussions, and I'm hoping this is an issue, having now published this, is something that I can then take up in Parliament and with the Cabinet Office, who are the relevant department. I became aware of the role of the Parliamentary and Health Services Ombudsman before I was elected, because I had a constituent who suffered he had an injection in his spine which went badly wrong, and far from relieving the pain, which he thought was going to be the case, he actually ended up in far worse pain and has been debilitated for about 14 years as a result. The difficulty with him and many others is they didn't have the money to bring a legal action. He had some insurance that came with his house, but the money ran out before they could get the medical evidence to prove what had gone wrong. And it was a question of whether they remortgaged their house to pay for legal evidence and legal costs, or whether in fact they just had to accept the situation as it was. Now, this story unfortunately doesn't have a happy ending, in the sense that we did get the Parliamentary Health Service Ombudsman involved. I did as a candidate, and went to them and said, I thought you ought to look at this case and the way in which the health service have operated in this man's case. It turns out really that the Ombudsman, like most other ombudsmen, and in the booklet it goes through the list of ombudsmen that are available, really look at the way the decision was made and the process, as opposed to the actual decision itself. Now, sometimes that's sufficient, because obviously it's clear that a public body, and also I talk about 3 ombudsmen in the book, the PHSO, the Local Government Ombudsman, and the Financial Ombudsman Service, who regulate or look after financial institutions and banks. And sometimes looking at the way the decision is made is right, in the sense that that's enough to see whether in fact principles of natural justice and fairness were followed. But trying to explain that to people when they want to know why the decision, the outcome that's affected them so badly, has not been queried is very difficult. So one of the recommendations that I call on is the fact that we should be clearer about the fact that the Ombudsman can look not just at maladministration, but also the decision itself. And I think the reason Ombudsmen are important is because we are a coalition government that believe in empowering people. We want to put power back in people's lives. For lots of people, legal redress and going to courts is just out of their league. They can't afford it. It's just something that they're never going to be able to contemplate. But getting sufficient administrative justice and having checks on powers of public bodies in particular, and getting public bodies, particularly councils often, as well as health trusts, to think about the fact that they are delivering services to consumers and customers, and people are paying their taxes, and they're paying a lot of tax, and they want actually decent service. And I think people are used to having a good service in other walks of life. You know, you go to John Lewis, you get a good level of service. You want that when you go to hospital. There's been a lot of complaints recently about the care of standard of nursing care, and I think people want to know that they're going to get good care when they have to rely on our public sector services. The Ombudsman also check on big government. We have a very powerful government now in this country. We have a lot of departments that make a lot of decisions, and say they consume a lot of our own taxpayers' money, and yet who actually holds them to account? Well, yes, Parliament can do, the select committees can do, but the Ombudsmen are also another check on government departments. And I was just going to read you the Parliamentary Health Service Ombudsman published on the 14th of September a report of an investigation she'd done about the Ministry of Defence and the Service Personnel and Veterans Agency. And just the press release is absolutely damning on the way that this particular individual was handled. And she talks about, she says, this is the worst example I've seen in nearly 9 years as Parliamentary Ombudsman of a government department getting things wrong and then repeatedly failing to put things right or learn from its mistakes. And this is all about treatment of a family who were interned by the Japanese during the Second World War. And it just is a catalogue of one complaint after another. Now, one of the things is that you can only go to the Parliamentary Ombudsman through your MP at the moment. And again, one of the things they are consulting on this. One of the things I call on is removing the MP filter, because I actually have a policy that if someone comes to me and asks me to refer them, I will always do it, regardless of whether I agree or disagree with their case. I think it's a right they can go to the Ombudsman. But some MPs won't do that. And I think that's, again, a fetter on holding government departments to account. Also, we may learn some lessons from mistakes. We all hopefully are going to get better. We're going to maybe save money. And if the Ombudsman hold the government departments or councils or whatever it might be, bodies to account, same with city institutions, hopefully they will learn from those mistakes and avoid repeating them in future. Sometimes all people want is an apology. A lot of the time when people go to complain about something, they don't actually necessarily want costs or compensation. I think we're very fearful of a compensation culture in this country, which we have seen grow up. But I find a lot of the time when people come to me, all they want is to know why something went wrong, somebody to say sorry, and somebody to say this is the lesson we've learned, and we're not going to treat, whether it's, I had a case in Leicester Hospital of a woman who died, and her husband came and he said, I just want to know that another family is not going to go through what I had to go through, trying to get decent care, trying to get someone to listen, trying to get some dignity for my wife as she lay dying. And the other thing that the Ombudsman can do is to spot general patterns. The Parliamentary Ombudsman has done that. Particularly, you may remember there was a report in the year about the care of older people and spotting patterns of that care of the older people within the NHS. The Ombudsman at the moment, they often have to wait for a complaint to trigger, obviously, investigation, whereas actually they should be able to spot, a bit like really any of us who are MPs or councillors, we should be able to spot the pattern of something going wrong with an authority and then say, actually, this point needs investigating. The other point I want to look at was how much the Ombudsman cost. The Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman, the figure I've got in here is something like, it was £32 million a year. And that's a lot of money. And I think I've worked it out, it's about £1,400, just under £1,400 per complaint. The Local Government Ombudsman is £700 per complaint, and the Financial Ombudsman Service is £639 per complaint. So why is there a wide disparity? What is it some are doing and some are not? How effective are they? Who's actually listening to them? Are they actually following through on the points that the Ombudsman makes in their reports? So when I talk about time for reform, I've already talked about looking not just at maladministration but also service failure and decisions taken by those providing the services. I think the Public Administration Select Committee in the House of Commons should be beefed up and should look not just at the work of the Parliamentary Ombudsman but also the Local Government Ombudsman as well. I think it should be greater publication of reports and greater reporting of those reports on an anonymised basis if necessary. Sometimes people don't want their personal, because often it can be quite personal the things that people bring, particularly talking about health service complaints, but they don't want to drag through the press, but you can have things on an anonymised basis. Again, the Parliamentary Ombudsman is very good at doing that. I think the Local Government Ombudsman less so. I've talked about being able to spot general patterns without needing a specific complaint to trigger an investigation. And it may be time for the Ombudsman to be merged. Again, my surgery, I get a lot of complaints about things that have gone wrong. Perhaps we need a bit more of a one-stop complaint shop, something that could be looked at, seeing whether the Ombudsman could work together. They are all collaborating a bit more now, but perhaps we could go, I think we should probably go a step further. And then sometimes there's also a layer between Ombudsman and public called adjudicators. And this is particularly the case in HMRC, HM Revenue and Customs. You go to the adjudicator first, and then the adjudicator looks, and then you go on to the Ombudsman. Well, to me, again, that's quite a big way of consuming taxpayers' money. And I'd like to know how effective that is, and whether, in fact, if you beefed up, had a sort of one-stop complaint shop, you wouldn't need the adjudicator. You would actually just have a proper Ombudsman service, and they would be probably a department that would look at initial complaints, and they would then escalate that if they felt a complaint was very serious and needed to go forward. So, not the most exciting of topics, but thank you to Bretwalda for publishing it. But I do think it's an area that needs looking at, and I will be pushing further and on this. And I think the next thing that would be nice would be to work with councillors across the country in terms of getting examples again of poor customer service, and other MPs as well, where they've made referrals to the Parliamentary Ombudsman and what we would all like to see done differently.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much, Nicky. You said it's not the most exciting of topics. I certainly found it very interesting. I was a bit, when you said, I want to write about the Ombudsman, I was a little dubious about it. But when I got the manuscript and read it, I thought it was absolutely fascinating, and I've really enjoyed your talk today. I am aware that we started a little late today, ladies and gentlemen, and some of you have got to go off to other meetings. There is some more food and drink available, but if it's all right with Nicky, we have got a little time for a few questions. So, has anyone got a question? Gentleman at the back.
Nicky, if I pick up on something you just said, about you refer all people coming to you wanting to refer something to Parliamentary Ombudsman. Could you give us an idea of how many you're talking about in the course of a year for a typical MP?
I've had about, this is my election, so we're talking about 15, 16 months. I've had about 4 people wanting to go, to a variety. I think I've had a couple, 2 wanted to go to the Parliamentary Ombudsman, and 2 wanted to go to the Local Government Ombudsman. But what I do tend to find is people don't think about the Ombudsman necessarily. Sometimes it's up to, we do point it out to people, or they've gone away and they've actually sort of done a bit of research on the internet. I don't know what they type into Google, you know, how do I complain about? And then obviously the word Ombudsman pops up, and then they come back and they say, how do I take this to the next level?
And with the local government, do you work with local councillors on that?
What we tend to do, and what you have to do quite rightly, is to exhaust all local complaints procedures first. So in the case of local government, I will obviously first of all talk to the relevant local councillors. Often the councillors will bring the issue to me, actually, and then we'll talk to make sure we talk to the chief executive of the council, who will investigate, and normally does, in my cases, does a very good job of talking to the service heads. But sometimes there's just something that clearly has just gone wrong, and it's often down to an individual officer, sometimes acting outside their remit, or somebody just not thinking through what they were doing and the implications for that particular individual. And so I'm quite open about it. I will say to the chief executive, actually, the constituents still like to refer this on, so I'm going to now help them take it on to the Local Government Ombudsman. And to be fair, if they're sensible about this, they will then say, well, actually, when they've got the findings, there's probably something there that we can learn from. We didn't do right.
Thanks.
Okay, next question, lady here.
Yes. Nicky, do you think the general public actually understand the Ombudsman? I mean, we all know Ofcom and things like that, and that sort of, and I know sometimes in some of the front of the phone books, they'll say, well, if you have a complaint, you can go to, but I didn't know until I got really heavily involved, and I think the people with politics, that there were ombudsmen. I think your idea of maybe the Ombudsman, almost instead of being 3 or 4 separate ones, you have one at the top that sort of then filters like a triage nurse or something, and such like, and not so many big knobs underneath. And I think the other thing is, but I think it's mainly the public understanding the levels of way they can move. And I think sometimes in the past, one way and another, councils, authorities, Parliament have kept a bit stum about this. Sort of, you know, we won't tell them too much, therefore they won't complain.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and I think one of the things is running a sort of public information campaign. It's very difficult because we all know, I mean, you're an elected councillor, and we all want to avoid vexatious complaints and gumming the system up, and there is a danger. But as you say, if you have a sort of triage system, where somebody initially looked at it and then said, yes, you know, this is clearly, there's going to be grounds here for taking this further. But without sort of reinventing and say having this adjudicator ombudsman split, which doesn't make a lot of sense. But you're right. I think a lot of people don't know about the ability. And as I say, a lot of people then sort of say, oh, I've got to go to law, I've got to find a solicitor, I've got to go to find legal aid, or, you know, and of course we all know legal aid budgets massively under pressure. And as I say, in my experience, a lot of time people don't want compensation or costs or anything like that. They just want to know what went wrong and an apology.
And I think the people that are going to the level of the ombudsman, other than just maladministration of a local council because they've spent too much money or something, but if it's something to do with health or HMRC or something, they're normally in a position of stress anyway.
Absolutely. And
right down to sort of parish and my level of borough councillor, I don't think we know enough information about ombudsmen.
Well, there we are. So that's part of the reason for
dish it out to all councillors.
Speaking as editorial director, buy a copy of the book.
Bookshops,
I think we've got time for one quick question, sir.
Nicky, I, as somebody, hopefully I'm the only person in this room that's ever been reported to the Ombudsman, and the objection, basically, to those who don't know, I was a planning officer for part of my life, and somebody didn't like the decision I took, and so they reported me to the Ombudsman. There was nothing the Ombudsman could have done to change the decision, but these people thought that by complaining to the Ombudsman they could actually get the planning permission reversed. And it was stressful for me, it was stressful for people who complained, and in fact I think there was a lack of information. When that person first complained, what I felt should have happened is they should have had a letter saying, thank you for your complaint, we want you to know whether you definitely want to take it forward, but please note, we cannot change the planning decision. And these people didn't know that.
Yeah.
And I think perhaps the Ombudsman themselves can perhaps be a little bit more open about what they do and don't do.
I think it's exactly right. I think it's about managing expectations, and I think you're right about a sort of initial letter. It goes back to the sort of triage type point, which is these are things we can look at, and these are things that we just can't. And being very clear. And planning is obviously one of those issues. It's very emotive. A bit like when things go wrong with the health service often as well, and the other one is school admissions. But I think there is a slight distinction between the way the decision is made and obviously the outcome. And there are certainly cases where actually they could look at the decision that's been made, not I think in planning, but I think there are probably other areas where actually the outcome can have been so sort of catastrophic is perhaps too strong a word, but it can be very debilitating for somebody, and actually that there can be a time. And it's interesting, the Parliamentary Ombudsman often will, she flexes the rules. And I have great respect, one of the reasons for writing this was I have great respect for Anne Abraham, who's the current Parliamentary Ombudsman, because I think she has made the system within her remit, she's been able to make it work. And she, as I say, the press release things she writes are, when she finds against a department, are truly devastating. And I'd like to know how much notice people do take.
Okay, well, thank you again, Nicky. We're going to have to wrap it up there, I'm afraid, everybody. Thank you all for coming. Been very good to see so many of you turning out for a lunchtime Fringe meeting, and thank you again to Nicky for being such an interesting speaker and indeed for writing the book for us, so thank you very much.